Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharmarashtra Jayate. Om Hri Om. Welcome everyone to the ISDS live stream. It is absolutely wonderful being here with you all. And let me very quickly apologize actually before we begin. I just have to take care of one very quick technical issue. And that is, would you mind running and getting the Yeti microphone? The one thing that we forgot. Hopefully everyone can hear me even without the microphone, but with this Yeti microphone that we use, the audio is especially crisp and clear, so we forgot to set it up, unfortunately. So we're going to do that now. So before I proceed, just give me a few moments, please, and we'll set up that microphone. Very good. Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much. Again, it'll just be a moment. Very good. All right, we are completely set up now. Hopefully people can hear me even better than you could just a few moments ago. And with that, again, I want to thank you all very much for being here. It is absolutely my privilege and my honor to be here with you this week. And for those who are new or don't quite know what this is, I'll very briefly explain. This is being presented to you by the International Sanatana Dharma Society, an extremely unique movement that is predicated upon the mission of restoring what is called Sanatana Dharma to this world. Sanatana Dharma, in turn, is the most ancient, continuously practiced religious tradition upon the face of the earth, bar none. And this is the organization that is presenting this to you. And what we do is an online satsanga. In other words, we have a religious or spiritual gathering, and we do this, indeed, again, in accordance with the tradition of Sanatana Dharma. What we do is not any form of universalism or any form of New Age spirituality or anything modern whatsoever. Indeed, modernity is itself somewhat anathema to the very concept of Sanatana Dharma as the eternal natural way. So indeed, what we present to you every week on this channel, in this live stream, is extremely unique and is unlike anything that is presented by any other channel anywhere on any platform whatsoever. So that's what you're experiencing today. So several things to be said first, and that is, first of all, if you have not yet done so, please subscribe to this channel, because after describing it as being extremely unique, you do want to subscribe to make sure that you get notices about all of our upcoming videos. The other thing is, please like this video if you can, because that helps us with the algorithms. The more likes there are, the more possibility that there is that YouTube will suggest this video to others. The other thing I want to mention is, please visit our website whenever you can, and that is dharmacentral.com. And you will see that this is a tremendous resource on, indeed, this very ancient religious tradition known as Sanatana Dharma, which is followed by, for those of you who do not know this simple fact, this is the religious tradition presently of 1 billion people upon the face of the earth. So this is what we are talking about when we speak about Sanatana Dharma. So when you go to dharmacentral.com, you will have much more information about this truly ancient and profound religious tradition. And when you're there, you'll see that our books are available. We have quite a few books describing very in-depth and in a very introductory way, in accordance with the book in question, what is this tradition. We have a beautiful music CD that is available in which you can hear me reciting sacred mantras. We also have some articles that are available, etc. You can also, if you so choose, become a member of the International Sanatana Dharma Society. So with that, again, welcome. And what we're going to be talking about today, very specifically, is something quite unique, and that is the teachings of Lord Shiva, very specifically. And Lord Shiva is one of the most important demigods in Sanatana Dharma. He is one of the most powerful, one of the most important beings. And unfortunately, when it comes to what, interestingly, Lord Shiva himself, not speculation, not sectarianism, etc., but what Lord Shiva himself actually believes and teaches, sadly, there tends to be a lot of confusion and speculation about this. Now, like with every other topic in Sanatana Dharma, there should not be any confusion. Because in order to have a firm and authoritative understanding about anything pertaining to Sanatana Dharma, what do? We look to the actual scriptures of Sanatana Dharma. So in the same way, when it comes to Lord Shiva and what his actual teachings are, what do we do in order to know those? Again, we simply turn to the Vedic scriptures. And let me tell you, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of verses throughout the totality, actually, of the Vedic scriptures, in so many Upanishads, in so many Puranas, in so many different places, in which, indeed, either the teachings of Lord Shiva are described, or, in many cases, Lord Shiva himself is actually speaking and telling you, this is what I believe. It's very nice that you have your speculations about me. It's very nice that you have your speculations about what I believe. But Lord Shiva is explaining to us, this is what I am telling you, that I believe. So, again, of hundreds of verses that we could have looked at, we're going to be looking at one very specifically. And the reason why this is so important is because, again, it is from an authorized, recognized Vedic scripture that is Padma Purana, which is listed in all traditional lists as one of the 18 Mahapuranas, one of the 18 authorized Puranas recognized throughout the totality of the tradition of Sanatana Dharma. So again, this is Vedic. This is one of the Vedic scriptures in the form of one of the Puranas. And what I'm going to be doing in a moment is I'm going to read this rather long verse, and this indeed is Shiva himself speaking. And very simply, the verse proceeds thusly. Mahadeva, and that is one of the names of Shiva. Mahadeva, Shiva, said, quote, "There is no better abode than Vishnu. There is no greater penance than Vishnu. There is no greater religious merit than Vishnu. There is no hymn that does not pertain to Vishnu. There is no greater truth than Vishnu. There is no greater sacrifice than Vishnu. There is no greater meditation than upon Vishnu. Though there is no better recourse than Vishnu. For him who has devotion to Vishnu, what is the use of many hymns, and the very extensive sacred texts, and thousands of vajapeya sacrifices? Vishnu is full of all sacred places. The Lord is full of all sacred texts. Vishnu is full of all sacrifices. I am telling the truth, and the truth only. I have told you this, which is the full essence of all that which pertains to Brahman." And this is from Padma Purana 671, verses 309 to 312. So again, this is not just anyone, but This is Lord Shiva himself who is speaking here. Now, it's interesting. You've heard me talk about this before, about how there are some verses that are somewhat general verses, but then there are some verses throughout the Vedic scripture in which it is especially the character and the stature of the individual who is speaking that gives that verse or that string of verses immense power and special power. So thus, for example, when Narada Muni is saying something, as an example, well, then it's especially something that we should listen to, where our ears should perk up. Then what to speak of if God himself is speaking? So, for example, with the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna is speaking, or in the Uddhava Gita, which is part of the Srimad Bhagavatam, again, when Krishna is speaking. When we have a very high being, either God or someone very close to God, who is speaking, if we have intelligence, it is at that time especially that we must pay rapt attention to what this individual is saying. Because this is not just anyone. This is either God or a very close associate of God. In the same way, with these verses here very specifically, again, this is not just anyone who is speaking. Indeed, it's not just even just any rishi. For example, oh my Lord, to be a rishi is considered to be one of the most exalted statuses that an individual can have. Indeed, it is the rishis who reveal the scriptures. But let me just say, in this particular case, it is not even just a rishi who is speaking, but rather it is Lord Shiva himself. So thus, we have to take this quite seriously. So, what is Shiva actually saying here? First of all, let me just make an overall comment. It's quite obvious that in these verses, Lord Shiva is making it very clear that he is a great devotee of Vishnu. Not just of anyone, but he is a very great devotee of Vishnu, and thus, by implication, Vishnu Tattva, that is all of the aspects of Vishnu. So thus, this is why in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it actually says in the 12th canto that Shiva is the greatest Vaishnava. That is, Shiva himself is the greatest of all devotees of Vishnu. And again, this is only a small string of verses. There are hundreds of verses in which Shiva is actually spoken of, or in which Shiva himself makes it quite clear that he is a devotee of Vishnu. In some verses, he talks about being a devotee of Rama, who again is really an avatar of Vishnu, etc. And there are hundreds of such verses, and these are indisputable and more. This is not just anyone speaking, but Shiva himself is explaining. You see, we can speculate about, for example, just using a material example, we can speculate about, what some author really meant in his writing. Let's say a living contemporary author. What did he actually mean by such and such in his writing? And we can speculate and speculate and speculate and create an entire cottage industry of speculation. Or we can go to the author and ask the author. And if the author himself chooses to explain to us, the author will explain. And once the author has explained, the argument is settled. Well, in the same way, again, this is Shiva himself explaining what his teachings are and what his beliefs are. Now, all that being said, we will now proceed to go through these verses line by line. So again, Mahadeva or Shiva said, "There is no better abode than Vishnu." This in itself is a very, very important verse. And the reason why is, what is meant by abode? What is meant by abode? Well, it means a place, it means a dwelling, it means an area in which the person in question has their locus of being, as I say philosophically very often. That is, they have their home there. It is where they are located. That being the case, when Lord Shiva here is saying there is no better abode than Vishnu, really what he is saying is that of all beings who have abodes, and that means every being, what being does not have an abode of some sort? You can look at the lowliest human being who, let's say, they are in prison. They have an abode. They're in prison. There's no living being that does not have a dwelling, that does not have that place that is its locus in which it is located. That being the case, what Lord Shiva is saying here is that of all beings conceivable, from the lowliest to the highest of gods and goddesses, of quite literally every being in existence who have abodes, that abode of Vishnu is the highest. That abode of Vishnu is the greatest. And what is that abode? This is known in the Sanskrit language as Vaikuntha. Vaikuntha, the Vaikuntha realm, that is that realm within pure transcendence, within the purely spiritual world in which Vishnu himself is located. That is the highest of all abodes. That is the highest of all places, and there is no better place than this. So qualitatively speaking, some abodes are better than others. So again, I can use the example of the prison. Oh, not a very good abode. Or let's say you are in dire poverty, and you're just living in a truly miserable place. Oh, these are terrible places. And then there are some places that are just kind of in the middle. They're nice. They're not perfect. And then you have palaces. You have planets that are heavenly, quite literally, and on and on and on. Well, the very best of all places conceivable is that place where Vishnu is. And you'll notice how I stated this. That place where Vishnu is. Because when we speak of the abode of Vishnu, do we mean an actual locus? Yes, we do. But more, it is Vishnu himself who makes the place sacred. It is Vishnu himself who makes Vaikuntha Vaikuntha. So thus, wherever Vishnu is, that place is best. So thus, where is Vishnu? Vishnu resides within our heart. When we ourselves realize Vishnu, we are in the abode of Vishnu. When we ourselves are devotees of Vishnu, realize his divine presence there within the Hridaya, within the region of the heart. What does this mean? This means that we are then at that moment spiritually, as far as our own consciousness, we are situated in that abode of Vishnu, which itself there is nothing better than. So this is everything that is being said by this verse. I shouldn't say everything because truthfully, there's always more. But this is the gist. This is the essence of what is being said with this one sentence. Now let's go on. There is no greater penance, tapasya. There is no greater penance than Vishnu. Now, interestingly, for the past several, I believe, live streams that we've had, I've spoken about penance quite a bit, I believe with most, if not all, of the verses that we looked at. And penance, or what is called tapasya, austerity, etc., is indeed something that is quite important, and there will be many forms of yogis, many sorts of spiritual, religious individuals, mystics, sages, etc., who will engage in penance, who will engage in what in Sanskrit is called tapasya. And what this sentence here is saying is that there is no greater penance, there is no greater tapasya than Vishnu. In other words, Vishnu is the very goal of all tapasya. He is the very foundation of tapasya. If an individual is doing penance, austerities for religious purposes, but if they at the same time do not have devotion toward Vishnu, then their penance leads to some material gain, even some psychic gain, but actual spiritual gain is not there unless devotion to Vishnu is there. So this is what this verse is saying, is that there is no greater penance than Vishnu. That is, Vishnu is the very foundation of all penance. The reason why we do any sort of religious austerity, whether it's fasting or any sort of austerity, is to know Vishnu. So thus he is the foundation of all true penance. So this is what this sentence is saying. Now, let's go on a little bit more. There is no greater religious merit than Vishnu. Sukriti, religious merit. There is no greater religious merit than Vishnu. In the same way that the previous sentence was talking about penance and how the very foundation of doing all penance should be to know Vishnu, and he is that foundation of penance. In the same way, now this is talking about religious merit. In other words, when an individual does more than just creates good karma, but in a religious way, because they are pious, because they are engaging in very pious, very powerful religious activities, when they gain what is called sukriti, or religious merit, as a result of that religious merit, well, religious merit too, interestingly, can be something that can be a very direct or very indirect route to knowing God. See, I've spoken about this in the past. People are motivated by all sorts of different motivations when they are on a religious path. Some people are slightly more materialistic, some people are as overtly spiritual as they can be, etc. So that being the case, when an individual engages in actions that produce religious merit, well, they can do so with or without devotion, and they can do so with devotion specifically to Vishnu or to someone else. Now, if they perform religious activities without devotion, there will be benefit, without doubt. But at the same time, as far as knowing God, well, that will be extremely difficult because it's not possible to know God without devotion. Now, going a little bit deeper, even just having, let's say, devotion as one is doing religious activities also in itself is actually not enough, because we become like that upon which we meditate. We become like that upon which we worship. So, in having that devotion, we have to make sure that we have devotion toward the right being. And as Lord Shiva himself, with these words coming from the very mouth of Lord Shiva himself, makes very clear that devotion should be toward Vishnu. Toward Vishnu, or by extension, Vishnu Tattva. In other words, any of the avatars, any of the expansions, etc. Anyone who is representing Lord Vishnu, that is Narayana, Krishna, Rama, Narasingha, etc., etc., etc. So that is what this is saying here, is that indeed we are to have devotion toward Vishnu, and in that way gain true spiritual and religious merit in such a way that, of course, what is this really? In fact, what are all these practices? This is all sadhana. This is all sadhana. These are all spiritual practices that are designed in such a manner, and not designed by some speculator on YouTube. These were designed, in some cases, at the very beginning of time. These practices were designed such that if we indeed practice these sadhanas that are spoken of here, and in many other Vedic scriptures as well, incrementally we will come to know and to experience God more and more and more. So that's what all of these are actually practices, sadhanas. Now, let's go on a little bit more to the very next sentence, and that is, there is no hymn that does not pertain to Vishnu. Oh, this is of infinitely more importance than it may seem at first glance. This is something that has been taught, actually, this is a truth that has been taught by many, many different acharyas throughout history, and that is that in actuality, while there are many Vedic scriptures, indeed hundreds of them, as I mentioned before, the Puranas alone, there are actually 18 major and 18 minor Puranas, so a total of 36 in all. And indeed, there are hundreds and hundreds of Vedic texts. Well, interestingly, these Vedic texts, as is the case for books in general, each book will have a purpose. You know, you go to the bookstore, books are not all one. Here's a nice little New Ageism. Oh, it's all one. Well, books are not all one. Here's a book on auto mechanics. Here's a book on philosophy. Here's a book on the history of Japan. Books are not all the same. They all have a thesis. They all have a purpose for why the book was written. In the same way, this is actually true about Vedic scriptures as well. You will see a little bit of a difference in emphasis between one Vedic text versus another versus another. Well, what Lord Shiva here is explaining to us is that despite the fact that indeed this is the case, he says, there is no hymn that does not pertain to Vishnu. Rik is the actual word for hymn. This is where we get Rig Veda, for example. There is no hymn anywhere in the totality of the Vedic scriptures, from the 4 Veda Samhitas to the Upanishads, the Brahmanas, the Puranas, and on and on and on, there actually is no hymn in the totality of the Vedic scriptures that is not either directly or indirectly focusing on Vishnu and directed toward Vishnu. So indeed, this is a teaching that you find throughout history, throughout the entire history of Sanatana Dharma. All of the greater acharyas spoke about this, about how indeed, even when seemingly, for example, in the four Vedas themselves, especially Rig Veda, when it seems like certain hymns are praising one demigod or another, in actuality, it's understood that the names are not necessarily only pertaining to the demigod itself, but to a quality of Vishnu. Indeed, this is understood as one of the principles, for example, of the Sri Vishnu-Sahasranama, where indeed one of the very names of Lord Vishnu himself that is listed in the 1,000 names of Vishnu is in fact Shiva. But not Shiva as the person we know, Shiva as the word, meaning auspicious. This is actually one of the names of Vishnu, interestingly. In the same way, the totality of the Vedic scriptures are really either directly or indirectly pointing to Vishnu or an attribute of Vishnu, which is why sometimes the word Vishnu is not used in and of itself, but the name is actually recognized as an attribute of Vishnu, even though it's also shared by one demigod or another. So indeed, this is a very important principle that has been recognized for thousands upon thousands of years by many great acharyas, and that is, there is no hymn that does not pertain to Vishnu. Now let's go on. There is no greater truth than Vishnu. There is no greater truth than Vishnu. This is one of the most important of the sentences here in these verses. And we spoke about truth the last time that we were together. That is last week, actually. Satyameva jayate. Truth alone prevails. And in that talk that was last Monday, I spoke about the nature of truth, and we went very, very, very in depth into factual versus eternal truth, etc. Many, many different concepts, very advanced concepts of truth that you find in the Vedic tradition that you find nowhere else, which is what makes the Vedic tradition the richest and the most profound religious tradition upon the face of the earth, bar none. Well, here, Lord Shiva himself is making this quite clear. There is no greater truth than Vishnu. Of all truths that exist, everything from the most pedestrian, what time is it? It's such and such time. Truths that are more factual than anything and really of no importance because of the fact that they're conditional and they're temporary. When we're speaking about truths as pedestrian as that, to indeed the loftiest and the highest transcendental teachings of the greatest sages themselves, when it comes to any form of truth, Vishnu is greater than any truth, even eternal truths, interestingly, even those truths that transcend materiality. Now, this is quite a statement, because really this is what Shiva is saying. Again, let me repeat, there is no greater truth than Vishnu. Vishnu is greater than even eternal wisdom. Now, for those of you who have been with me for some time, and for those of you who have a real philosophical bent, that's not a controversial statement. Because how can this be said? Well, very simply. Lord Vishnu, God, is indeed the source of all truth. That being the case, as the source of all truth, of course he is greater than all truth. He himself is the greatest of truths, being that wellspring, that source, that fountainhead of all truth itself. And again, not just anyone is being spoken of here, but very specifically Vishnu. You see, if we go along with the idea of radical universalism, Lord Shiva, instead of speaking about Vishnu, could have thrown any name in here. Again, you go by New Age standards, which means no standards whatsoever. You could have thrown any name in here, but he didn't. And the Vedic scriptures, as a total, do not. He is using Vishnu. He is repeating Vishnu again and again and again. Vishnu, Vishnu, Vishnu. And this is the Sanskrit. If you look at the Sanskrit, which I did previously, indeed it is Vishnu who is being spoken of by Lord Shiva. So thus, when he says this statement, it is more profound than we understand, that there is no greater truth than Vishnu, not merely God in general. You know, you'll see how very often I will use both almost equally, Vishnu, God, etc. Well, when we are speaking about Vishnu or Narayana or Krishna, now we are speaking with a level of specificity in which vagueness is eradicated. So thus, Vishnu is being spoken of here by Lord Shiva as that than which there is no greater truth. So in other words, what is he saying? Vishnu is God, because Vishnu is the very source of truth itself, and the very source of truth itself can only be God. So, that being the case, let's go on a little bit more. There is no greater yajna, no greater sacrifice than Vishnu. Sacrifice, the idea of religious ritual, yajna, is something that is central to especially the truly most ancient layers, let's say, of the Vedic tradition. Indeed, if you look at the Shruti literature, that is, again, if you look at the four Samhitas, at the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, the Upanishads, what you find as one of the central themes in all of these extremely ancient, extremely sacred texts is the idea of religious sacrifice, is the idea of yajna. You find this again and again and again all throughout the Vedic scriptures. So this is something that is a very important concept. And more, people will do yajna, that is, let's say, Vedic fire ceremony or any sort of sacred sacrifice or ceremony. People will perform different ceremonies because there isn't just one, there are many of them throughout the Vedic scriptures. They will perform these sacrifices for a myriad of reasons, motivated by a myriad of motivations. So in some cases, you can actually do a sacrifice in such a way that is quite materialistic. You simply want abundance. You simply want a better life in your next life, etc. So many materialistic reasons. But then, of course, there is yajna that is done for more spiritual reasons, where it's more selfless. You're doing it to appease the gods, as devotion to the gods. Or ultimately, you are doing such religious sacrifice as a sadhana to know God himself. So again, there are many different levels. So what is being said here is there is no greater sacrifice than Vishnu. In other words, again, as we were talking about with religious merit, with penance, etc., number one, Vishnu should be the primary, let's say, being who is worshipped with yajna, with sacrifice, number one. Number two, the entire reason why sacrifice even exists is because of Vishnu. And Vishnu is the very foundation of yajna, of sacrifice. Indeed, interestingly, I told you just a moment ago how there are many different sorts of yajnas that are available for many different reasons. Interestingly, however, it is universally acknowledged within the Vedic scriptures that when you build that fire in which you're about to do this fire ritual, the fire itself is recognized by all Vedic traditions as the very mouth of Vishnu himself. So thus, in a way, it doesn't even matter why you're doing the yajna. Oh, I want to appeal to Indra. Oh, I want to appeal to Shiva. Oh, I want to appeal to this god, this goddess. I'm doing it, so that I will have a better life in my next life. I will be born in Svarga. I will be born among the gods. Or on and on and on. I want to become a king in my next life. I want to have tremendous wealth. Whatever is the purpose for which you are doing that yajna, known or unbeknownst to you, when you are making those offerings into the fire, that fire itself is the very mouth of Vishnu. So thus, Vishnu himself is the very foundation of yajna. So that is what this is saying. There is no greater sacrifice than Vishnu. And now let's go on. There is no greater meditation than upon Vishnu. As we see images of Lord Shiva, we'll see him in many different sorts of activities. We'll sometimes see Lord Shiva as Nataraja, as he is dancing, as he's doing the dance of destruction, where it is his job to bring about the dissolution of the world. We'll see Shiva in many, many different ways, depicted in many different ways. But one of the most important and primary of which is that we will see Lord Shiva seated and steeped in intense meditation. We will see him seated in half lotus, full lotus, various ways, with his eyes closed and meditating. Sometimes we'll see him with a sannyasa danda, with a stick, and his arm will be rested on the stick, and he'll have a japamala in his hand. If you look up images of Shiva, you'll find images of Lord Shiva indeed meditating on japamala, that is, saying mantra. And this is the question that I always ask people. Upon whom is Shiva meditating? Well, here Shiva's telling you upon whom he is meditating, when he says there is no greater meditation than upon Vishnu. Indeed, Lord Shiva is himself the greatest Vaishnava, and what that means is whenever you see an image of Lord Shiva sitting and meditating, especially a traditional image, something that goes back hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. Upon whom is Lord Shiva meditating? Well, he's meditating upon Vishnu. He's meditating upon Sriman Narayana, being the greatest of all devotees of Sriman Narayana. So thus, he is making it very clear here that there is no greater meditation than upon Vishnu, and indeed, this is the very goal, ultimately, if you want to speak about the highest spiritual goal. Not the 10th highest, not mixed with materialism, etc., not New Age meditation. No, if you're talking about true, authentic, ancient meditation taught in the Vedic scriptures, taught by the Vedic Acharyas, with the goal of achieving that object, which is the very ontologically highest, well, that is meditation upon Vishnu. That is meditation upon Sriman Narayana. And indeed, again, here Shiva makes that very clear. Let's go on. There is no better recourse than Vishnu. Oh, whenever we are in trouble, whenever we feel that we need assistance, whenever we feel that we need help, whenever we feel alone in this world, whenever we need to turn to someone greater than us. Oh, there may be a multiplicity of beings who we can turn to, indeed, even humans. We can turn to our loved ones, etc. We can turn to the gods and goddesses. Again, we can turn to all sorts of powerful, interesting beings. But what Lord Shiva is saying here is the greatest recourse, the greatest person to whom we should turn is indeed Lord Vishnu himself. And why is this the case? Because it is Lord Vishnu who is, again, the very source and the very sustainer of everything else I mentioned. He is the source and sustainer of our loved ones, whether our best friends, whether our family. He is the source and sustainer of the gods and goddesses. He is the source and sustainer of all auspicious things within reality. That being the case, we should turn to him, to Lord Vishnu. And now, let us go on. For him who has devotion to Vishnu. Now, I'm going to actually stop with that clause for a moment. For him who has devotion to Vishnu. So again, Lord Shiva is making this very clear, that it's not merely, in fact, even just having recourse to Vishnu. Because, you see, a person can turn to Vishnu when they're in trouble and not necessarily have devotion. A person can do penances for Vishnu, but again, without necessarily having great devotion. But here, Lord Shiva is making this very, very clear. For him who has devotion to Vishnu. So thus, that bhakti element is considered to be crucial to really all Vaishnavas, and again, Shiva being the greatest of all Vaishnavas, to Shiva also. That bhakti element is crucial. So, for him who has devotion to Vishnu, and now it goes on. What is the use of many hymns and the very extensive sacred texts, and thousands of vajapeya sacrifices. Very good. So, here, Lord Shiva is juxtaposing the power of devotion in comparison to the power of these three things that he mentions. And let's very quickly go through this, because the three things are of less importance than the idea that indeed devotion supersedes them all. So, first of all, for him who has devotion to Vishnu, what is the use of many hymns? So in other words, of course, there are individuals who will recite the Vedas in a very empty sort of way. Indeed, I've personally known many such people. I've heard them recite hymns from the Vedas, and unfortunately these tend to be ritual priests who don't have devotion, whose goal is not moksha or liberation, who are not very close to God or to Vishnu, etc., etc., and yet they're expert at reciting hymns very, very beautifully. So what Shiva is saying here is that no, devotion is more important than the use of many, many hymns. Let's go on. And the very extensive sacred texts. In the same way, now speaking about individuals who study and study and study and study sacred texts alone, without devotion. What Lord Shiva is saying here is that no, devotion is superior to an individual who knows even the Vedic texts perfectly, who has read them, who can recite them, who can quote the Vedic texts, etc., but the person has no devotion. Rather, having devotion is superior to jnana, that is, to having the ability to read the sacred texts, memorize them, etc. Because you see, you can train a parrot to recite a verse from Bhagavad Gita, but does that parrot have devotion? Probably not. Probably not. You can program a computer to recite the entire Bhagavad Gita. Indeed, we all have this, where yes, we can listen to the Bhagavad Gita on our computer. Well, does the computer have devotion? No, of course not. It's just something that's empty. Now, we, listening, of course, can have devotion, but the computer doesn't. In the same way, sadly, there are individuals who, indeed, they will study the Bhagavad Gita. They will study these Vedic texts. They will recite them. They will be able to quote from them. Indeed, in some cases, quite arrogantly. You're having a conversation with someone, and out of nowhere, they'll quote the Bhagavad Gita to you, and you know for a fact that this person had a hot dog an hour ago for lunch. Well, again, to simply know the Vedic texts alone, without devotion, without the proper motivation, is empty. So what Lord Shiva is saying here is that devotion to Vishnu is superior. And then finally, vajapeya sacrifices. This is a form of sacrifice in which, to make it very simple without being very technical, because I believe there are, this is one of 7 different sorts of sacrifices within a very specific category. Let me just say this is a sacrifice in which well-cooked food is offered. So that's what's being spoken of here. And interestingly, Lord Shiva says here, you can perform thousands of vajapeya sacrifices, but still devotion to Lord Vishnu is superior. And again, for the same reason, why are you performing those sacrifices? We spoke about this a little while ago, so I'm not going to repeat. But yes, a person can engage in religious activities, seemingly pious activities, for rather materialistic reasons. That being the case, you can perform thousands of such religious sacrifices, but if that is your motivation, is simply a form of materialism, that's vastly inferior to having bhakti or devotion to Vishnu. Very good. Now let's go on. Vishnu is full of all sacred places, tirtham. Very interesting sentence here. We know that in the Vedic tradition, there is the idea of tirthas, that is, of places that are themselves sacred. Vrindavana comes to mind. Ayodhya is another place that is considered to be sacred. Vrindavana is associated with Krishna. Ayodhya was the kingdom of Lord Rama, etc. And there are hundreds and actually thousands of such sacred places. And interestingly, not only in India, but throughout the world. Indeed, there are sacred places in America. There are sacred places, believe me, throughout the length and breadth of Europe, where a god or a goddess or god has been present there. And as a result, it is a tirtha. So this is what is the idea of a tirtha, or a sacred place. So what this is saying is Vishnu is full of all sacred places. In other words, again, like with the other elements that we were speaking about, like with penance, with religious merit, etc., it is Lord Vishnu himself who makes all sacred places sacred, and who serves as the very foundation of all sacred places. All sacred places ultimately are there within him. So when you go to a sacred place where something wondrous happened at some point in history, and you feel this wonderful energy from that sacred place, this spiritual energy, understand Vishnu to be the source of that. Now let's go on. The Lord is full of all sacred texts. In the same way, all sacred texts, that is, the Vedic texts, that's what's being spoken of here, the Dharmic texts, not just any sacred text, not the Abrahamic sacred text, not a sacred text that was made up 150, 200 years ago. No, the Vedic text is what is being spoken of here. The Lord is full of all sacred texts. In other words, again, Vishnu is the source. He is the source of all the Vedas. Now let's go on. Vishnu is full of all sacrifices. So again, in the same way, all the yagyas, Vishnu is indeed the source. He is the foundation of all yagyas. When you offer a yagya, when you offer into the fire, it doesn't matter who you think you are ultimately worshiping or why you are worshiping. You are offering into the very mouth of Vishnu himself. And now let's go on. This is interesting, that Lord Shiva is saying this next sentence. He's saying this specifically to the skeptics, because he knows there will be, because there always are skeptics. In the same way that no matter how much you clean your house, there's always dirt that still needs to be cleaned a week later. There's still dust that needs to be cleaned a week later. In the same way, there are always skeptics. There are always individuals who are cynical and will say, oh, these teachings must have just been made up by so-and-so and such, and every sort of excuse for not taking these teachings seriously. But this is what Lord Shiva, Mahadeva, is himself telling you to your face. Oh, take this seriously. And why? I am telling the truth. I am telling the truth. Lord Shiva is appealing to you. I am telling the truth, and the truth only. So thus he is setting up his own epistemological authority with this one sentence by explaining to you that, number one, who is he? He doesn't have to say. The verse itself says, this is Shiva speaking to you. But now Shiva himself is telling you, everything that I've explained to you, please take this seriously. I am telling you the truth, and the truth alone. The truth only. So let us now go on. And he continues with really more epistemological statements. I have told you this. I have told you this. Again, let's stop there. That's the first clause. So it's a continuation of the previous sentence. So not just anyone. I have told you this. Lord Shiva has told you this. And what is this? What are these teachings that I, as Lord Shiva, not me, obviously, I'm speaking on behalf of Lord Shiva. He is saying, what are these teachings that I, as Lord Shiva, have given to you? Well, this is the full essence of all that which pertains to Brahman. And what is Brahman? Let's start with that. What is Brahman? The most detailed, the most intricate, the most profound, the most important topic in all of conversation. Human or God conversation. God meaning the gods. Devanagari, the language of the gods, the communication of the gods. Whatever exists in all languages, that pertains to Brahman. That pertains to this being known as God. What he is saying is, what I have just told you, I, Lord Shiva, I have told you this. which is the full essence. In other words, there is nothing deeper, there is nothing higher, there is nothing more profound, there is nothing more true. The full essence of all that which pertains to God. And by implication, again, this is why I mentioned the gods. By implication, what Lord Shiva is saying here is anything that can be spoken of about God, anything that can be understood about God, either by humans or by the gods or by the goddesses or by any living being, I have now explained to you the full essence of that in what I have just explained, in what I have just taught you, in what are the teachings of Lord Shiva. So thus he ends these verses by making it very clear to you. Again, take this seriously. As I myself am known for saying now, don't play games. You want to know God, or do you want to play games? You want to know God, or you just want to satisfy your ego? You just want to satisfy yourself psychologically. You want to just look good in the eyes of others. You want to just exploit others in the name of spirituality. You want to pretend that you're a guru when in actuality you're not even a fraud. You're not even good enough to be a fraud. Do you want to play games, or do you wish to know the highest? If your goal is indeed to know the highest, this is the grace of God, is that He gives us the way in which we can know Him. And first and foremost are the teachings that are there in the Vedic scriptures. You want to know the highest? You want to know God? This is how. Without playing games, putting your ego aside, putting materialism aside, putting crass motivation aside, and with absolute humility, with absolute devotion, with absolute dedication, simply surrendering your life at the feet of that being who is the highest of all beings, because He is the source of all reality. By doing such, you will indeed know that highest. But what does it mean? For you psychologically, it means, again, having the humility to look at these teachings. And of course, not just these few little verses that we're looking at today, all the verses that we have looked at from so many Vedic scriptures. Look at them, read them, take them seriously, and follow them. Again, if your goal is not just to play games out of curiosity or whatever motivation, if your goal is to know God, to know the highest, to experience that highest, to serve that highest, then read these Vedic scriptures and practice what is being said here. Practice what is being said. Again, Lord Shiva says to us, I am telling the truth and the truth only. He is telling us the path by which we can know God, and knowing God by which we can have true happiness. So these are the teachings of Lord Shiva. And again, these are only a few verses from Padma Purana. I could have picked hundreds of verses in which Lord Shiva himself is teaching. Please take these teachings seriously. Please make Lord Vishnu the very center of your life, the very center of your concern, the very center of your reality. Have great devotion toward Lord Vishnu, and in this way you will know freedom. You will know liberation. You will know joy, you will know bliss, you will know happiness, you will know God, and you will know that to know God means to serve God. So with that, I thank you all very much for listening to my discourse. This was a longer discourse than most of them are, so sadly there isn't a lot of time for questions and answers. And I wanted to spend time with this, honestly, because of the fact that it is indeed something that's very important. Again, to repeat, this is not just anyone who is speaking. This is Lord Shiva himself. And I felt it was very important once and for all speculation to be eradicated, and for us to know what are the teachings of Lord Shiva in accordance with Lord Shiva. in accordance with quite literally the words coming out of his mouth. So with that, again, let me tell you, there are only 5 minutes left, and let me apologize. I won't be taking questions and answers, only because it's not even fair. I would have probably time to pick only one question out of what are, I'm sure, dozens and dozens and dozens. So rather, I believe that we will maybe end here. And let me say, the next time that we get together, that is next Monday, I will absolutely make sure to leave a good amount of time for questions and answers. I'll try, if I can, to even leave half an hour or so. So half of our broadcast for questions and answers. So again, we will end here. And just very, very quickly to remind you of a few things. Yes, please subscribe to this channel if you have not done so yet. Please like this video. When the video is available as an actual recording, please comment as much as you can, because I've heard that one comment is worth X number of likes, actually. And again, it's not because we want fame. We couldn't care less, actually, about fame. It's because it just helps with the algorithms. And in that way, more people have the opportunity to see this video in the future. When you have a chance, please also do not forget to visit dharmacentral.com. And you will see that this is a tremendous resource on Vedic spirituality. We also have a Discord server. Excuse me. And I'm sure that people have already put up the URL several times. If you are, and only if you are, a sincere and humble individual who wishes to learn more about the actual tradition of Sanatana Dharma, then please join our Discord server. You will find hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other very sincere followers of the ISDS, the International Sanatana Dharma Society, there. And you will have tremendous fellowship. I will tell you, some of the most wonderful human beings on the planet, and I don't say this lightly, I don't say anything lightly, as I hope you know at this point. Some of the most wonderful human beings on this planet are on our Discord server. Meaning some of the most good people, some of the most sincere people, some of the most helpful people, some of the wisest people are there on our Discord server. So please join. Again, if you meet that criteria, if you are someone who sincerely wants to learn, then please join that. And I believe that's all I want to say for now. Again, I thank you all very, very much for being here. Once again, I do not do this often enough, but I thank the moderators also for all of your tremendous help with both the Discord server, with this live stream, etc., and all the ways in which you moderate. Thank you all so much for all of your tremendous help with everything that you do behind the scenes very expertly. And with that, I ask you all that you please join us again next Monday when we have our next live stream. And with that, namaste. Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. Suryavansha Jayate. Victory to Sanatana Dharma. Victory to the Dharma nation. Victory to the solar dynasty. Evam bhavatu. May it be so. And with that, everyone, until the next time that we meet, I ask you that in every way, you please take very good care of yourselves.